All right, everyone, we're live. Thank you for joining the stream. So today I'm very, very honored to be joined by the wonderful Clare Mann, the vegan psychologist who coined the term Vystopia. Clare, thank you so much for coming on to the live stream today.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here, and thanks for everything you're doing.
Yeah, no problem. And yourself as well. And I know people are excited to come to this stream because, as I was saying to you just then in the pre-chat, you know, the work that you've done, I think it's so relatable for so many of us in the animal rights movement. You know, what we experience mentally as vegans, it's very important, it's very significant, and it's something we absolutely need to discuss. So I'm going to give the audience today as well their opportunity to put their questions to you, because, you know, in the podcast, it was just me and you, but, you know, today, and I apologize, not everyone in the audience might be able to get their question read out, but I will do as best I can as we chat. If you want to ask some questions and stuff, you can. But yeah, as I say, apologies if you're if we're mid discussion, I can't read your question or something like that. But Clare, just tell us a little bit about what you do and you know, the sort of stuff you do as a psychologist.
Yeah, sure. Well, I know you're in England, so originally I am from England. I come from Plymouth, and I've always been interested in what makes people tick. And, you know, why do people do this? Or why do they do that? And lucky enough to have parents that got me to ask the questions. So psychology was the natural thing for me. But I actually left school at 16. I didn't start studying to be a psychologist till I was about 23. So being a psychologist and finding out and trying to alleviate human suffering was something that I, you know, was very interested in. And, you know, why do some people seem to overcome great difficulties and others don't? And seem to continue what they've been perhaps born into, their oppression and their families, you know, abuse or something. And so what I do, what I have done and what I do, it may be a little bit different. So very, very briefly, I was originally an organizational psychologist, where I worked in organizations looking at team building and recruitment and selection and training and development, culture change, those sort of things. And I really am grateful for that now, George, because, you know, when we're looking at sort of the groups that we come across in the vegan movement, you know, why don't they work together well? Why is it that they seem to start off well and then they break down? So there's a lot of principles perhaps we could talk about there. I still do training and development work, not only in the vegan sort of movement, but in generally. I choose my organizations very carefully, of course. But I also do a lot of one-to-one work with people who are, you know, struggling with life. But really these days, 99% is working with vegans who are wanting to find a way to live in this world when they find out about the systemized abuse of animals and see it all around themselves every day. So training and development, sort of one-to-one work. And of course, I've written lots of books and I do podcasts and at the stage of, you know, how can I best be of service actually these days?
Yeah. And why did you coin the term Vystopia? What is the significance of that? Because I think it's very significant in the psychology world that this term needed to exist. So tell us about why you coined that term and why that is significant.
Yeah, well, I guess I was struggling with this set of experiences. And a few years ago, I wrote an article for Animal Liberation, a magazine in Sydney, Australia. Animal Liberation in Australia has been going since the 1970s, by the way. They all met in a little tiny room near the Rocks, which is by in the centre of Sydney, near the Royal Opera House. And I wrote an article there and it said, should all vegans be issued with a mental health warning? That was the title of the article. I think it's, I'll re-put it on my website at some stage. And it basically said, I'm someone who is suffering from depression, anxiety, misanthropy, and often I feel suicidal. And why is that? And that is because I'm looking at the madness of our abuse of animals in a systematized way, where we're trying to find peace and kindness and freedom and purpose for humans, and yet we're doing this to animals. Am I mentally ill? Should we all be labeled as this? Because I'm going to put my hand up first to be labeled. Or is something else going on? And what I am experiencing, and I'm seeing in countless others, is that normal, predictable, and actually desirable. And I started to talk around that issue of, if we find out what happens to animals and we just look the other way, in many ways it's pathological. We should feel like this. So that's how it sort of started. George. So I needed my own recovery, I guess, because I knew I was dealing with, I've had, having been around a few decades, I've had my ups and downs and challenges and pains and my own therapy. And I've sought out a lot of help. But this was something very different because I knew exactly what the issue was. So when people come to see me, George, we don't have to dig around for weeks or months trying to find out what's the source of your depression. We know what it is. It's right in front of us. We should be depressed and anxious and in pain. But there is a way through that, by the way. So that's how it came about, George. And trying to just look at a list, there's people were saying, well, how is it different, non-vegans? How is this different from normal depression or obsessive compulsive stuff? That sort of thing. But can I just tell you the pivotal point, George, at which it changed?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
I got a referral. I started to get referrals from doctors sending me people to work with me. And I will smile at this. You'll smile as well. Can you imagine a 18-year-old person coming to me and coming in the door? They've been labeled as having an eating disorder. They had apparently, now vegans can have eating disorders, but it's certainly not because they don't eat animals. And that they're a little bit obsessed and they're perfectionists because they don't see the world as they should. And this person came in and said, look, you may not understand this, but I'm a vegan. And they didn't know I was a vegan. It was a few years ago. And then this person suddenly found out that I was a vegan psychologist.
Amazing.
And it was all instant recovery, as you can imagine, because there was nothing wrong with this person other than the normal challenges of life, which we all have. But they suddenly were able to be seen. But doctors were referring people to me and psychiatrists that they said they had eating disorders because they wouldn't eat properly with their families or eat what other people had. They had social adjustment disorders because they wouldn't celebrate Christmas or Easter with Easter eggs and Christmas with turkey. Now, the thing that really concerned me, that I really knew we needed a word, was when they said, these people that we're sending to you are self-harming. They have such low self-esteem that they are watching slaughterhouse footage to cause themselves pain. Can you believe that, George?
So this is what psychologists were saying about, they were falsely saying this about vegans who were seeing them because they had what they had was Vystopia.
Absolutely.
But this wasn't a recognized thing. So this is where you come in and you say, hang on, no, these aren't eating disorders. These aren't social dysfunction disorders and blah, blah, blah. This is Vystopia. This is the anguish of being vegan in a non-vegan world.
Absolutely. But telling someone that they have such low self-esteem that they go and look at this footage to hurt themselves, rather than saying, well, maybe psychiatrist, you need to look at that image and you tell me if that's normal, that's okay. So there was this rage inside of me, George, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to use the power that I've got. I'm in the club, so to speak. So I'm actually going to let this be known. So this is what I did, and I thought I, worked with both my partner Brendan, which many people may even know because he was the path to my veganism. Actually, I might tell that story later, and also a dear friend of mine. We sat and I started to just talk about the issues, and both of them as vegans discuss this, of course, and this is what happened. And I just came up with this word. It had to be an opia or something, something like that. That was easy to remember. And it needed the vegan-y sort of link with it. I don't know, maybe I channeled it, George, but it just came to me one day and I went, Vystopia. Yeah. And then that's where it came from. So,
Great. Amazing story. And just tell everyone here, Claire, such as Rebecca here, how would they go about having a session with you to talk about their Vystopia? How would they do that?
Yeah, sure. Well, they just go to veganpsychologist.com and there's a contact form there. And then we would set up a quick informal chat sort of thing so I can hear more about you, see if I'm the person to help you, point you in the right direction, or we can set a meeting. That's just a 20-minute chat or something we can have informally.
Perfect. And I guess my first question that I wanted to start off asking you here, Claire, is are you a fan of this is a bit random, but are you a fan of The Simpsons at all?
I know it. I don't know if I'm a fan, but I certainly know it. And my goodness me, there's some truths in there and some predictions.
Right. Well, there was an episode in the early 90s that where and it's only just become relevant to me more recently. I never really cared much for this episode, but there was an episode in the early 90s where Lisa, she becomes very depressed because she realizes the amount of suffering that there is in the world. And she's wondering, how can I ever be happy, knowing the amount of suffering that there is in the world? So the first question I want to ask is, how can we ever be happy knowing the immense amount of suffering going on in the world? And is it actually selfish to be happy when we know all this going on? What's happening to animals, what's happening to humans, and so on? Is it actually selfish to be happy?
Absolutely not. Because what are we all waiting for? For us all to be happy before we say, hey, we're all here now, let's start creating happiness. You know, I think we've got to look at ourselves in a systemic way. You know, everything affects everything else. So if you break your leg, George, you know, your heart rate's going to go, your adrenaline's going to pump into your body, you're going to panic, you're going to be frightened or whatever. In fact, a change in one system affects another. Now, there's a lot of darkness and a lot of pain in the world, and we're not adding to that if we sit with our depression almost and say, well, and not until everybody's happy can we do this. In other words, it's really the law of, there's a couple of principles here, and Dr. Will Tuttle talks about it. Please check out his work, The World Peace Diet. And he talks about this a lot, where he talks about the golden rule. The golden rule is that do unto others as we would have done unto ourselves. So if we want a happy, productive, abundant world, really, let's start acting in that way to some extent. But we've got to work through our pain. That's the thing. We've got to transmute that into something else. And he also talks about the law of reciprocity, which is in every religion, in every philosophy, is for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, really. And so if we don't allow ourselves to be happy, we're not adding to the world we wish to create. And that doesn't mean we should all be, you know, toxically positive and sort of it's all okay, because it's actually not. But and also, how are we going to survive, George, if with all the activism so many people do, we've got to actually, we're taking credit at our emotional, physical and spiritual bank, really. And we get terribly overdrawn. That's where we get run down, we get burnt out, and some people leave the movement. We don't have the luxury of that, do we, George? We've talked about this. We really don't. The animals don't, and we certainly don't. But what we do need to do is to keep putting credit in the bank. So to do things to resource ourselves. So how I answered that question, it's really about looking after ourselves and, you know, I'm toxically negative, I could see someone said.
Well, yeah, one thing I guess that I can take from your answer there is maybe actually happy, maybe it's selfless to be happy if the purpose of you being happy is because you need that happiness to actually go on and to help others. So that could be a good way of looking at it. You could think about, if we think that it's selfish to be happy in such a horrible world, which is kind of something I've been thinking recently. Well, how can I be at my best if I'm just miserable all the time? And how you know, how am I going to help change things for animals if I'm not taking care of myself, if I'm not looking after my own mental health? So if anything, happiness is actually a form of helping others in a sense, right?
Absolutely, you're right. George, could I just ask you a question? I've got an 18-year-old vegan tapping at the door, 18-year-old dog vegan. And would you mind if she joined us? And we're on a vegan show, so
we would love them to join us. Yes, please.
I'm sure you would. She's
yeah.
This is a lovely thing about being vegan. You know that's not going to be a problem. This is Brody. She joined me 3 years ago as a 15-year-old rescue. And she was on death's door, really. And she's on a vegan diet. And she's now 18, nearly 19.
Amazing. Well, it's great to meet Brody, and it's great to have her as part of the stream. We've got a question here. Thank you, Sherry Cordial, for the donation to my activism. That's very much appreciated. Thank you. And they're saying, is it normal for a vegan to actually start neglecting their own hygiene? Have you actually seen this, Claire? Like, people, this is a form of self-harm, I guess, when someone is depressed. Like, have you seen this, and is this kind of a normal thing you would see?
Yeah. Hi, Sherry. Absolutely. The worst case I think I saw is someone doing a lot of undercover footage, probably about 10 years ago, where they were going out every night And in the end, they didn't even take their shoes off at night because they firstly were so tired when they came back at 4 a.m, having taken footage, but they were always ready to just suddenly jump out of bed and go and do that. So they were neglecting their personal hygiene. They were, I think it's a sort of form of self-flagellation, as we say, is people feel so awful at what they see. It's very easy to internalize that and feel guilty, I guess, is who am I to have any life at all? Can I just use an example here, George? Has anybody ever seen, have you seen the film Good Will Hunting?
No, but it's 1997 that film wasn't it? It's Matt Damon, right?
That's right. Yeah, you were born then, weren't you?
I was. Well, I only know of the film because one of my favourite movies of all time is Saving Private Ryan, which is 1998, and I think Spielberg picked Matt Damon based on his performance in Good Will Hunting. So I haven't actually watched it though, but carry on. Or I'll go.
But I can see Good Will Hunting, and this is he's a boy genius, really. He's like a mathematical genius, topping the world. But he's born in a very poor area in sort of the Midwest of America or whatever, and he's doing manual work, and he's there with his mates, and they get drunk every Friday night and whatever, and all sorts of, but they're actually in a university town. So when they go to the pub, the university guys take the mickey out of them and that sort of thing. And but this guy's as smart as they come. So he's talking to a guy at the bar, and this guy uses all this highfalutin language about his education, his degree. And Good Will Hunting said, "You've wasted your thousands on an college education, mate." And he suddenly spiels off exactly what about this mathematical theory, because he's just gone and studied it himself. Okay, right. And the guy's, so that's the back cloth. The long and the short of it is he gets propelled to success and whatever. But on that journey, there's a moment in that film when this guy gets picked out, and he's literally going to be propelled to work at some, Harvard University or something, say that. So he's at that sort of level. We hasn't even got a degree or anything, but he's a genius. And he's in the car with his mates in this beaten up old car that's, got all different colors on it, bits wheel welded on. And they said, "Gosh, so you're really going to hit the thing?" He said, No, I'm not going. And they said, "Why aren't you going?" He said, "You must be joking. This is my home." He said, "I want to get married. I want to have kids. I want to be with you, playing around." And the guy turns around and he said, "How dare you?" He said, I would do anything for your life. I want to escape this reality." He said, I'm working 15 hours a day. I'm exhausted. I can't see, I have a great laugh on a Friday night. You've got a chance to go and do that, and you're not taking it. He said, "If you don't go, you're actually kicking me in the face." And I always remember that. Now, we can't ask the animals what they think, but they're locked in cages. They're locked in testing labs. And for us to actually, therefore, cause even more harm to ourselves and say, "Well, I'm going to be like you," if we're empowered and we look after ourselves and we take action, this is the thing. I'm not just talking about entertaining ourselves, for the sake of it, or distracting ourselves with shiny objects, is if we bring a level of softness and kindness and relaxation into our lives, see it as resourcing ourselves to be there tomorrow, next week, in 10 years' time, because the animals need us to do that.
So this is the importance of self-care in the movement. It's not just about looking after yourself. Self-care actually helps the animals in a way. Oh,
yeah, because I've seen so many people become run down, bail out of this. And when I talk to vegans that are real veterans, much more than you've been around a lot longer than you and I, George, is, people, we've got a lovely lady here in Australia, Patty Mark. She's been an activist for 40 years. Her work was the precursor 20 years ago to what DXE were doing. She was extraordinary. Someone just said it, I've seen burnout, and then they leave. But I talk to these people. I talk to the Lynn Whites of Animals Australia, people that have been around a long time, in Newkirk and whatever. And they say you've got to have a strong foundation, of nutrition, of exercise, of sleep. I don't know about you, George, but when I go out with, say, vegans for a meal or something, or we might see a film together or something, I can only do that in many ways if I've done activism. I know it might sound a little bit strange. It's almost like letting your hair down after you've done certain things.
Right.
Whereas before I was vegan, it was about entertainment. It was about, yeah, let's go and, enjoy. And there's nothing wrong with that per se. But when I came aware of that, I couldn't continue with that, but it becomes a sort of collective sort of injection of energy in many ways. It says, look, we've converted this a bit. Let's resource ourselves again so we can keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is interesting. We've just got another question in here from Sherry. Thank you. If the environmental crisis is the only driver that will force humans to enter into living sanely, then how is it possible to remain optimistic without falling into melancholic depression? Bit of a deep one there, but yeah.
Well, it is. I'm glad we're keeping the question up. Oh gosh, now Brody wants to go out again.
Oh.
Do we mind? I'm sorry, you can see she's getting a little
go for
older.
it. Yeah, please.
Okay, Brody, come on, my love. You're on a live stream. Hello. Come on, sweetie. This way. This way. Oh, here we go. Gosh, all the dogs are coming in now. Okay. Don't do that. Come on. Here we go.
Dog invasion now, guys.
Gosh, it's like a rescue here, isn't it? So many of them here.
Yeah. So the comment is essentially saying that, I guess, the only reason humans might change to a vegan world is just because of an impending environmental crisis.
Yes, absolutely.
How is it possible to remain optimistic in that sense, if that's what it's going to take for us to end the animal holocaust? That, oh, well, I'm going to die, so I think then I'm going to stop harming others.
Absolutely.
Before the apocalypse comes. Like, how can we remain optimistic in such an event?
Yeah, absolutely. It gets our backs up, doesn't it, George, when we hear the term, I'm vegan for the environment. What does that actually mean?
Yeah.
It's in other words, it might, and I'm so glad, Sherry, by the way, and this is where I get really controversial, and you called it environmental crisis. There is no doubt that there is pollution, ocean dead zones, environmental destruction. We cover everything with concrete. We take all the trees down. But that is very different than the marketing term, which is climate change. Now, I know that is because it actually used to be called global warming. But those in power, I would say, well above the government, decided that wasn't working. So they actually called it climate change. We've got to realize there are a lot of what we call false flags around. That doesn't mean that our environment, we are destroying it so much that we are in crisis. But do not be hoodwinked into the means for governments and beyond to control and direct society by making us frightened and saying it's all our fault. Okay. And while they sit down and eat meat, by the way, as you know, and dairy and contribute to one of the biggest sort of things. So how can we do that? Well, I think it's always we're holding this light, aren't we, in many ways, is, people really don't know what veganism is. They really think it's a fussy diet. People still go down that path. And it's people really realizing that it is a philosophy of a way of living, to not use and exploit animals. Now, we're animals too. And that's another thing about, how we behave to other people, is it's getting people become concerned about themselves. I'm vegan for my health. What does this mean? No, you're on a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
And environmental thing, you're concerned that you or your children won't live on this planet in often the miserable way that you already are, because if you're sitting there like a scared person, what are you doing to contribute to a better world would always be my question. We've got to keep holding that light that actually we will never have peace, freedom, and purpose on this planet while we are taking away the peace, freedom, and purposes of all animals. And so it's inviting people into that. And this is where communication comes in, isn't it, George? Because when we are able to, sometimes less is best when we say things that make a chink in the consciousness of other people. Because most people have psychic defenses. They push this down, because how could you eat the flesh and reproductive secretions on your plate every day? And somebody points it out and you don't go, oh my gosh. Yeah. Because there's this huge distortion and there's very powerful means to stop us seeing it. So it's because people really, when they worry about themselves, they're panicking in their fear about that. They're not saying, I can see the animal in the cage. We see the animal in the cage or the testing lab. they're actually seeing something very different. They're seeing a diet, they're seeing a change in their lifestyle. Our job is to get them to engage with that reality enough that they become so uncomfortable that they've got to shift their behavior.
Mm-hmm. And now let's talk about this kind of these defense mechanisms and so on, because the next question I actually wanted to ask you is, why are anti-vegans the way they are? What is the psychology behind that? Because as vegans, what we often forget sometimes, you know, we get very angry at these people. We're scrolling through Facebook and we see these comments or whatever, or we sit down for a meal with some idiot who's saying this or whatever it is. You know, you do street outreach and you meet these people in the street, and I get very angry because I can't understand what is going through this complete, sorry for my language, complete shithead's mind. Why did that person just say that? Why did that person just walk past that screen and just laugh? Or why did they just, why did they try and shoot down what it is we're trying to do, where all we're trying to do is create a better world with less suffering? So why are these people the way they are? What is driving them to be this way? Help us to understand what's going on here so we can stop being so angry about why this is.
Well, it's interesting. And I too, of course, struggle with that. I can't, sometimes you think, well, what is the thing that'll get through? How can people have such a defense? Because for so many of us is we find out about this and it's right away. It's like, if this is the worst diet on earth, I'm having it because I'm not going to partake. And then we have these people struggling and debating. So what is the mechanism? Well, they're definitely what we call psychic defenses. Is actually the ability for us to compartmentalize. And that happens in all areas of life, because you could have somebody who's getting beaten up at home and they will go to work saying, my husband or wife loves me. And they absolutely do. They will pretend it doesn't really exist. We are able to distort our reality so much to what is actually going on. Okay, it's almost as if, there's lots of things going on in the world at the moment, and people are going, oh no, it's just a bit of a, this, and we're waking up one day and then the world's completely different. This is how it happens. But I think there's a number of things. There's this collective memory and knowledge of what is going on at an unconscious level. You cannot have 99% of the population contributing to the heinous torture and cruelty of animals every day without that. They don't have to see it with their eyes or hear it. At some level, that is, firstly, I think Will Tuttle talks a metaphysical and toxic sort of situation. We are ingesting the pain and suffering of others. And when people come a little bit aware of what's going on, or the slaughterhouse worker is an immigrant who doesn't even speak the language of the country, who can't feed their family, goes into work in those places. They're not all psychopaths, or in all different parts of life where there's suffering. And then it's almost as if people aware of that, but in transmuting that, they become the oppressor too. They almost want to be enslaved themselves as well. It's the most extraordinary thing is when we're doing it and we're not aware of it, we're kind of aware of it, because how does the food get on our plate? People do occasionally think about it. They then are part of a slavery system, and it's almost as if they will put up with and submit to governments, to other people, to authority, and lose their freedoms. We're losing our freedoms at the moment. You just look around and see how the world is changing. It's because when we take away the freedoms of others, it gets taken away from us. There's the law of reciprocity. But there's a theory I have, George, and this is a more personal one. And I'd be interested in what people think of this. So most people think they're free. Okay, I can choose my own partner, or whether I want to be single or whatever. I can choose my own job. I can choose where I want to live. Oh, I'd like to train to be a hairdresser. I can go on a course and do that. I can choose my friends. I can choose to go to the pub at night, whatever. People think within certain bounds they've got freedom. But actually, at some existential level, philosophical level, they know they're not free at all, because they're choosing from a very little tiny diet of choices, which says this is how society lives. Okay? They also are born into the monetary system. Why is it that everybody on the whole gets married and has children? Whatever changes we see happening these days, the majority of people do that. Or they go and work for a job for 40 years they don't like. They have to forego certain things to buy bricks and mortar, or buy a piece of metal called a car, or have their 2 weeks holiday. Some people don't look around and go, well, how come we're all doing this? It's because actually we have very limited choices through our norms, our culture, our assumptions, what I call the myths of choice. Okay, we've got all this going on. However, George, there's something people get to do 3 times a day that most people have absolute choice over in the Western world. Okay, and unless you've got an overzealous partner or a supportive doctor, they're not going to tell you not to stop eating it. Okay, whatever your health is. So guess what? 3 times a day, when they open the door from their job and they go out, and there's research done on this, George, is people get really miserable if when they went out for lunch to get by their sandwich or whatever, it was a bad experience. That's actually research done in the UK.
Right.
Is actually they feel miserable because it's so loaded. They've got 1 hour when they could have something nice. It's a bit of a break. It's very, enjoyable, whatever.
Yeah.
However, the vegan then comes along and goes, hey, look, you think you're free. They don't quite say it like this. You think you're free, but you don't really have choice because we've got this little limited within it. But one thing you get to do 3 times a day is what you eat. Guess what? You can't do that anymore. And then we get this absolute rage. Whenever the reaction is out of proportion to the pain, it's tapping into something else. All right?
But you know what? This just annoys me even more about these people, because it's like they don't realize the irony in that they're the one taking away others' freedom there. It's not them.
Absolutely.
They think they're the victim and they're saying, as you're saying, damn, this vegan's coming along and they're taking away my freedom in this moment. The one thing I get to do 3 times a day where I'm free, and then the other times I'm chained to a desk, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But they don't realize they're not the victim in that situation. So this just kind of,
Yeah. Well, perhaps I should highlight what I've just said to you is unconscious. They don't go around thinking, hey, look, I've got free. They don't even know. They think they're free. I can do what I want. I'll just leave this job when I get another one. Okay, so a lot of it's all unconscious, George. We come along because the reaction is so out of proportion to the pain. Hey, you show them the footage where we're doing street activism. You can't tell me what to do. You think you're better than me. You think I'm a terrible person. I don't care. Animals, all the nonsense. We know the laundry list of nonsense that people say. Oh, yeah. And you're thinking, most people, what has happened to you to dumb you down so much that you can't see that animal strung up somewhere and go, oh my God, that's terrible. Yeah. And so I think it's tapping into the wider oppression they're feeling themselves in a wider unspoken way in our society that gets people to submit to totalitarian regimes. And that's really what we're talking about. We call it government. We don't really have democracy. It's a nonsense. And so they react like that. And also they feel very uncomfortable because the majority of people will find that horrible. And instead of thinking, oh my gosh, look at the suffering of that poor animal, they want to get rid of that. And what better way is to shoot the messenger? Or let's do something so outrageous that George will stop advocating. You laugh and say, yeah, bring it on, show it all to me. You think they're lost cause. The people, and this is something for everyone, the people that react more strongly, that push back, they are nearer to veganism than the person goes, George, it doesn't touch me, don't care.
Right.
When they react, you've got them, okay? But this is where we have to be really sophisticated, and we need to direct that energy to ensure they don't shoot George the messenger or anyone else, or Sherry or Alison or all these wonderful people on this call, is they have to feel uncomfortable. And that's why I love street activism with the videos, George, because when you're having an interaction with someone and you're telling them, they have to experience the horror of what you're telling them, but actually look you in the eyes as they know you're someone who is choosing not to partake of that. Yeah. And so they're having to deal with the dynamics, that group dynamics. When we're looking at the screen, they are forced for a moment to live with their own feelings in reaction to it before they look in another person's eyes. And we stand next to them and go, hey, what do you think? So really important, it's they're nearer. So instead of, we want to transmute your rage and irritation, which is perfectly normal and desirable, George, into how can you then turn that into, so they have to sit with that, and it's less possible. We're moving them towards the point when they become vegan and they go, George, I can't believe I didn't see it, which is what they all say to us.
Okay, well, yeah, maybe I should start thinking about it in a different way then. Maybe when I see these like assholes do this kind of stuff, maybe what I should actually think is that's like, actually that's a little small win deep down I got them to react, which means maybe my activism was actually effective. Because you get a lot of people who say, look, this is why no one likes vegans. You look what you did. See, you just pissed off that guy over there. See, it's not working. So those people are actually wrong. Actually, maybe it is working, right?
That's right. The best phrase I like, George, is when you're lost for words and someone says something so outrageous and go, what is it like for you to hear that sort of thing come out of your own mouth?
Yeah.
If you want to get them back to what they are, I've had someone say to me before when they wore a pair of, oh my goodness, zebra skin boots to it was a non-vegan who came to see me many years ago. And, they didn't come to see me about veganism and whatever, but, it was standing right in front. She asked me what I thought of the boots. You started it. And I said, well, they do look very stylish. However, are you aware of the process that happened to get them? She came forward. She said, yes, I am. And I don't care.
Wow.
Okay. Whoa. So I said, can I ask you a question? Now, that's really important, George. If you can catch them enough to ask them for permission to ask the question, when someone says yes, neuroscience tells us they kind of come forward. They've given you permission. You're not imposing it. They said, yeah, you can ask me a question. So always ask a question. Can I, they say, what's veganism? Can I tell you? Yeah, I'm just asking you. As long as it's get them to say yes. And I came forward and I said, what is it like for you to hear that come out of your own mouth? And the person became uncomfortable because you want them. So when we can't get them to look at the screen and say, what do you think of the suffering of it? What's it like for you to see such suffering? If you can bring more detail in, what's it like for you to see such suffering and hear yourself say, I don't care? They have to stay with their emotion. They can't suddenly rant outside. Even if it's momentarily, we want them to become uncomfortable. And the majority of people do become uncomfortable because it's a horror story.
I'm going to have to remember that one tomorrow because I'm doing outreach tomorrow in Bath with We the Free. So that's definitely a very good question I can ask instead of my, I don't know what I usually do when it can vary wildly depending on what the bystander said. But that's a very good one to remember. Before I want to just expand a little bit further on this, let's read this. Thank you, Sherry, for another very generous donation. So Sherry's asking, when a vegan equates his or her suffering to non-human animals by stating that humans are animals too, how do you overcome feeling sad and anguish? I'm not sure I understand the question, but you have a better understanding than me.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about that. So when a vegan equates his or her suffering to non-human animals, what you're saying that a vegan is saying that animals, how do you feel? So is this something about minimizing the pain of, are we saying, so when a vegan equates his or her suffering to non, so in other words, we're saying, is it when so it's a vegan, because we get lots of non-vegans doing that, don't we, George? They go, well, we're animal, what about humans? I love it when people say that. Well, what about humans? What do you but never answer the question. We want to sort of have a go at them, don't we? And go, well, what about humans? I know Jerry's not asking that. It's like, oh, what would you mean? What about humans? Question, George. The Socratic method, but we need to do it more. It's always get people to give you more information to know where they're coming from. All right.
Yeah.
I think Sherry, you need to clarify on that one. I think we're not too sure. Basically, those who do nothing to end the Holocaust. Oh, so is it?
Maybe I think I know what they're getting at. Okay, so I think it's when when us activists are asking other activists to get active, and we're like really pissed off because we're like, guys, there's a Holocaust going on and you're not doing anything. And then other activists or people who should be being active are saying, well, I'm an animal too. Like, what about my mental health or something like that? Does it annoy you when you see vegans say, well, I'm an animal, and it's kind of I'm abusing myself by doing activism or something like that. I think that's what they're getting at.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we're really trying to compare pain here, aren't we? So is our pain sitting with our mental anguish of knowing about these creatures equivalent to stabbing baby calves in the neck? Well, we could have a whole debate about that, but I think the suffering around they're losing their whole lives, aren't they? But also the total incarceration, abuse, powerlessness. Having said, we can't compare pain. Let's just take emotional pain in the general non-vegan world at the moment. I always say we can't really compare pain. Often people go, oh my gosh, your plight's worse than mine, therefore do I have a right to say it? Pain is really an indicator, isn't it, that all is not right. Okay. So, I remember being at the Adelaide Vegan Festival, and dear friends of mine, that vegan couple who are not doing their podcast anymore, so which is a bit of a shame because they were, did a lot of them and you still access them. And the whole debate was, they had just come back from like 40 around Europe, 40, vigils at slaughterhouses and whatever, and they're pretty burnt out. And one of the people on the panel, I think it's on YouTube still, said, well, some people can't do that because of their own condition. There's no way they can advocate at all. And I remember Natasha becoming very heated and said, if only if the little small bit you do is wear a vegan t-shirt, you have to do something, because our plight is nothing relative to these animals. Okay, so there were clearly, if I hear so many vegans go, oh, I'm not one of those people, I can't look at that footage. And I say, do you think any of us are okay with this footage? I said, the people that show the footage, I think, are so pained by the footage that the only solution is to actually get it out there to change it. So you could argue that they suffer more pain because, it's such they're not able to compartmentalize that. It is very frustrating because, yes, we need more vegans, but we actually need more activists. We need more people to open up the eyes of other people, that the pathway really, I think, to our freedom and liberation starts with actually what we need to get our own house in order. And while people are eating the flesh and reproductive secretions of animals and doing all the other things, what they put on their bodies and what they furnish their homes with, etc., we will never have freedom. So this is something we can, make that change in the world. It is frustrating. Encouraging people there are different forms of activism. If we knew the one way, should we all be doing it? And I know it's perhaps something we're going to talk about, which is vegan infighting, but where people attack other people. I've seen prominent, well-known vegans of 30, 40 years attack, people like Animals Australia or Viva or someone like that, and say, they're welfareists. Anyone who has seen what they've seen over there, they're not welfareists, but they also work with the resistance and the intransigence of humans in culture. And so by opening up, they're not advocating for bigger cages. That might be the path they're doing, but they're all abolitionists. Of course they are. Yeah. But just, but each of us are needed to, I've heard people criticizing AV and going, this is a terrible thing. It makes it worse. Well, if, it was me. I saw footage, George, and I changed on the spot almost because so it does influence people. Some people come a different path, but we need more activists without a doubt. But use our energy wisely. If we get frustrated and irritated with people, is that a good use of our time, or does that deplete us and also just add to this pool called, desperation and unhappiness? Yeah.
The next thing I wanted to ask you about is a very strange phenomenon that seems to be all the fashion at the moment. Have you noticed? So plant-based meats and stuff, they've always existed, right? Like we're talking throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, even though there's nowhere near the proliferation that there is now, there was always the Corn this or the Linda McCartney that or whatever there was, right? And probably many were very, very terrible brands, I'm not sure. But what is the deal, Claire, with, at the moment, there seems to be like an anger from non-vegans, I've found, when they're reacting, whenever there's like a post about, oh, these vegan burgers are out, or there's these vegan hot dogs. Why are they currently at the moment targeting these posts, saying stuff like, if you want to eat meat, then just eat meat. How come I thought you were against meat, yet you're eating hot dogs and stuff like that. Why is that bothering them? Why do they care?
Oh, George, gosh, we've spent an hour on it. Why do they, again, the reaction is out of proportion to the threat. So in many ways, I wonder if we've taken away another excuse. Is actually, you like your taste, you like all this stuff, do you? Like your barbecues, you want, and things like some of these meats, possum burgers or just, I can't think of them because they're not really my sort of thing.
Right.
But they do taste. That's why I don't like them, actually, because it reminds me of 40 years ago.
They're so realistic now, aren't they?
But they're so realistic. But it's. I think it's another excuse taken away. Is if taste is your issue and your enjoyment and you want this salacious sort of thing, there's another excuse taken away. So they try to sort of even say it. If you really want it, well, I don't understand these vegans. Another thing, of course, is a lot of those meats. And often vegans say this is, well, they're not for us, they're for you, actually. They're taking away another excuse, but again, the reaction's out of proportion to the threat. So always you're not dealing with this burgery thing, is because if you think about it, if there's nothing to fight against, just go, oh, it's up to you, you want it, I don't like it, but they don't, they go this rage sort of thing. And another, I've heard vegans act, saying, and street activism, well, if you if you like it so much, why don't you have it? And go, I didn't become vegan because I didn't like the taste of meat. I didn't stop eating this stuff because of the taste of meat. I became vegan because I was aware of the suffering and torture of animals that got that on my plate. So actually, no amount of taste is going to do that. However, they've now come up with these burgers, so actually, I'm going to have them. It's you've got to make the segue to the actual thing, which is what veganism is about. They're trying to distort all this stuff for us, aren't they? It's
we're not against taste, we're against violence and abuse and rape and slavery, basically, is the key thing here.
Yeah.
But I like what you said there. It's another excuse taken away. So it's like maybe that's part of it, because throughout the 80s and 90s, a lot of the plant-based meats were just kind of rub. I think David Rams mentioned this on a live stream I did with him recently. I think this was his theory. He said basically he reckons we're seeing it more now because the plant-based meats have got more realistic than they ever were. So that, just like you say, it's like crap. Now that tasty dough has been taken away, kind of thing. Now there's even more of a reason for me to get defensive, because if I was to eat this instead of that, now I've got to think about potentially committing my life to veganism.
That's right.
And that's something I just don't really want to do. So this is their defense mechanism at play here.
I think that's very poignant. I think it's actually also very true. Is the reality is, if we want people, the only thing that makes vegans really is when they have that emotional connection and ethical connection to stop the suffering of animals. Because then it doesn't matter if it's the worst diet on earth or whatever path, you're not going to go back. And how many times have we hear people say, I used to be vegan? It's like, I used to be a child abuser, but I sort of, I used to be someone who didn't abuse kids, but I thought, I'll keep doing it. This is rubbish. This is nonsense. So they were never vegan. But let's not get too, people get ideologically caught on that in the debate. But once there is the emotional connection with the suffering of the animals, I think some people stop eating animals because they feel the pain in watching this. Okay. However, are they empathizing with the suffering of the animal? Because when they're suffering, the animal is, we just have to walk past a shop that's cooking bacon and eggs, don't we? And there's, the horror of that smell it's dreadful. So, there's that reaction to it. If it's a taste bud thing, then that doesn't affect people, because we don't see that egg and bacon sandwich. We see the animal in the cage and the suffering. And that's why our Vystopia is so painful, is because it's around us all the time. And so we've always got to get people back to the, if they're talking about food, talk about food. Well, people don't stop eating animals who don't like tasty food. The reality is, for many people, they still like the taste, and because they know about the suffering of animals and the torture of them, they do anything not to partake of it. However, this has now come on the market, so they can have that at the weekend. But separate the issues for the person. Don't get into a debate about the vegan burger. Get into the debate about what veganism is, a philosophy underpinning your life, a non-abuse, really.
Let's talk about now another symptom of Vystopia that I know that happened to me. I can pinpoint when this happened to me. I'm going to say it was 2015 when I became a misanthrope. And this is something I really need to hear your opinion on, right? I have no shame in admitting now that I hate humans. I've found now that I care less than I ever did about humans. Like before, it's weird because veganism has, despite the idea of veganism, you know, many people say is you become more caring and stuff. Well, with regards to non-human animals, I've become infinitely more caring. What's happened though, as a consequence of my Vystopia, is I care less than I ever have done about humans. Is this understandable? Is this normal? Why is this happening? And is it something we should overcome? Or is this something that it's just like we're meant to roll with?
Oh, such a good question, George. Is if I hear this from so many people, they see often humans suffering and they say, well, it doesn't touch me. Or they walk past a baby in the pram and there's a dog to the side and they immediately drop to the legs and start playing with the dog. Or they,
Oh yeah.
you know, you know, and so is it not? I think it's a process one goes through because one is in so much pain of the size of the problem. You know, the 1.3 trillion animals being killed a year, if we include every fish individual, which we should, and every crustacean. Is it more than that, George? Is it what's yeah, you know, that we hear these different terms. We should be, and then we look at other people and think, how can they continue to do this for nothing more inconsequential than their taste buds, their traditions, their selfish habits, you know? And so we can get to use that very powerful word, hate humans. Okay. In doing this, we're kind of hating ourselves though, because if we look at all of us are abused from childhood, the first ism we come across is speciesism. You know, little babies, they're playing. I don't think we can talk about evil later. I've come to realize I think there is evil in the world. However, on the whole, you've got this new baby comes along, whatever. Everyone's trying to do everything for the baby, and they get this fluffy little lamb to play with, this fluffy little pink piggy. And then they get to a certain age, and they're having lamb chops for dinner. You know, and they don't quite know until the kid sort of asks the question or whatever. There's this awful tension that must happen in a child's mind and body that says, well, there's my fluffy lamb, there's my fluffy puppy over there, and yet I'm eating this one. And this poor little child has to, what do they do at 6 months, 5 years old? Walk out the family and go and find their tribe? They can't do that. So they have to distort it, because to hate their mum and dad for giving them that dilemma, it's a lot of this on non-verbal, of course, is too great. So there's immediate speciesism that happens. That's happening. And then 3 times a day, that is reinforcing that that's an okay situation. So, you know, we come across people as adults making these decisions, but they've had millions, hundreds of thousands, millions, 100,000, whatever, meals that time that reinforce this, that they didn't even think it was a problem. They're trying to deal with the normal challenges of life. And now we're telling them the one pleasure they have possibly, they can't have anymore. And so I think we're hating our, George, I think it's a way of dealing with our pain. It's a way of saying it wasn't for these terrible humans doing this, but actually when everything we're doing is contributing to this pot called, you know, either good or bad, evil or whatever, in one sense, we got a choice. When we put energy to hating others, in many ways we're hating our own potential, because we were once like that. But there's, in terms of what we did for animals, but there's a lot of people that feel very passionately about refugees or, you know, children working as slaves, for instance, sex trafficking, all these things. It's all about, they're wanting to stop the suffering. They've empathized at some level with the suffering of those victims. And what we're saying, we've empathized because of the size of the problem and because it's so easy to do something so powerful to not partake of it. We can't understand why they won't stop it. You know, we can't all stop child sex slavery, but we can stop eating animals, which immediately stops the demand. And so I think because of the ubiquitous nature, it's everywhere, animal abuse. In fact, you've got to take action to not abuse. You can't just be neutral on this. I think that's why we find it so difficult. But if we're all a point of consciousness, George, in many ways, we're hating ourselves. We're hating our potential. Dislike the action, the behavior, what is coming through the person. But if you can start to see the potential of someone that actually, you know, I'm not religious, but for the grace of God, almost. It's a bit like that. But I understand it. I've, I felt the rage towards people, the indifference, I have very few non-vegans come to see me. I don't know how they find me. They don't do any homework because everything would be about veganism.
Right.
And sometimes they tell me things that are so important to them. And I'm thinking, I really have to focus and be there for them, because I'm thinking, in the scheme of things, this is so insignificant, what you're talking about. You don't like the size of your nose, this is so inconsequential. However, that is their world. And we don't know what happened to them at school. We don't know the teacher that bullied them. We don't know all these things that happened for them to, what we've done is we're trying to open people's eyes to the suffering even wider. And until people get their own house in order to a certain extent, have enough groundedness, it's very hard for people to empathize with others' suffering.
What if I can't see their potential, Claire? What if I just, you've mentioned that, but I see this person, I think you're a no-hoper, you're hopeless. Why should I not hate them?
Yeah. Well, don't waste your energy on the hate. Literally, we've got to change our expectations, but hold the possibility that change could happen in the future.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like, if, you look at them, you're a lost cause. The majority of people follow. If I thought that everybody had to wake up consciously, empathize with the suffering of the animal, live and breathe every moment of veganism, that, they see a spider in their house, they don't go and get a can of spray. They open the door, they try to help the animal. Okay. I'd like it that everyone, and I hold that possibility. If I had to wait for everyone to wake up, I think I'd be feeling really depressed. Okay. However, the majority of people follow. Look what's happened in our world over the last 3 years, how major corporations and major institutions have been able to railroad people, without us going into the what's and whatever's this, of literally controlling people. The very organizations that tell us to eat animals, are now telling us about our health. I'm sorry, pal, if you eat meat 3 times a day, I'm not going to take you seriously. It's how easy it is for people out of fear to give in without actually doing any homework and making informed decisions. And they're attacking other people who perhaps don't feel the same as they do. That's not helping us. Okay. Lost my train of thought there, George, but so how can you do that? So, so it's holding the possible. Don't wait. So the reality is the majority of people will follow. We have got to reach a tipping point, though. This is the reality, I think, is, let's just take a quick example. I don't know if there's any marketers in the thing. Have you ever seen the normal distribution curve? We go back to our maths at school, that actually talks about marketing, and marketers use it, but animal rights organizations use it too. It's literally how change happens. So let's take an example. Is mobile phones, when they came out 25, 30 years ago, I knew people that got on the bandwagon really early. Oh, this is going to be really important. And everybody laughed at them. They were called the innovators. Those people that invested in mobile phony stuff or got one very, very early on were called the innovators. Now, they make up about, 2.5% of the population. Okay, so this sort of grows, and then they got them. And then there's this leap, which is called the early adopt, and we've got the, it's very early here. So we've got the innovators.
I will Google this graph. So there's innovators.
Yes.
There's the early adopters.
Early adopters. They're about, and that goes up collectively up to about 13%. Okay, so you get more people getting into the mobile phone. Then when we reach that tipping point, there is a massive, over 30% of what we call the early adopters. So people start coming on in early majority, and they start taking all by mobile phones. Then we get the late majority, another 34% or something like that. They take the next lot. So everybody's suddenly getting them. Okay, but these these innovators back here are laughing because they made investments in their mobile phone thing, and they were all laughed at. Okay, George, what's the one after the late majority?
It's the laggards. Those are the ones that I hate.
Yeah, there's another little group there, which is a bit like that, 12% or something. But there's a little group after then. After.
all that I can see on the little graph when it's innovators,
Yeah.
early adopters, early majority, late majority, and then laggards.
Oh, maybe that's why I can't remember it, because there isn't an extra one. The laggards, I
Yeah,
think about 7%. They're the people like Granny who goes, oh, shucks, I can't get hold of my grandson. I've got to get a mobile phone. And they get a really old-fashioned one. They can't,
right.
it's not a smartphone. But this is like veganism. We are the 2.5% at the moment. We're the innovators. We're the people that have woken up about the horror, which has gone on for 10,000 years, really, of, what Will Tuttle talks about, this herding of animals and this industrialization. Now we're getting herded ourselves, remember?
Yeah.
And go and have a look at a fabulous article on this thing called Spooks, the Herding of Humanity. Brilliant. The World Peace Diet, by the way, Dr. Will Tuttle. Must get him on your show. He's a great guy. He's but it's he's been vegan 45 years, by the way. Extraordinary. So we are now pushing into the 13.5%. Now, whilst it gratifies us all that if people can eat vegan burgers, it reduces the suffering, it's reducing our pain. Of course it is. But we really want them to be vegan. We want them to have a philosophy of the non-use and exploitation of animals, including the people we dislike, George, those lost causes. But the thing is, the majority of people, they're going to follow. It's a bit like, now I'm in Australia, and but what are the bins that do the recycling? As to whether the recycling happens, we'll have that debate another day. The greenwashing by our councils. Oops, did I say that?
Right.
What are the bins, George, that actually take the recycling?
Wait, what?
Where you are, what color are your bins? They have a different lid, or for the recycling?
So green is plastic and oh, you're putting me on the spot now, Claire. Green is plastic and cans. Black is glass. And then blue, we have like a blue canvasy type one for cardboard.
All right, okay, that's right. And then if we really check to see the council do it, they probably don't. But that's another story of this, But let's hope. The key thing is, the majority of people put their recycling in these bags, not because they care about the environment. They do it because that's just what we do.
Right.
Okay, so see it like that is they'll go, oh, well, we don't eat meat. There was a time when people didn't eat meat, for goodness sake. I mean, I remember, growing up as a kid, the amount of food people eat, the amount of eating this street, you didn't have the money for it. My family didn't, but it was not normal. It's become normal. Let's create a new norm. Let's create where, compassion and kindness is enshrined in our cultures. And we do that through example, waking people up, but always bring them back to the philosophy of what veganism is. It's not a plant-based diet. These are just one of our behaviors. I use that word often. It's like people go, oh, well, vegans are those people that eat this. I go, oh, well, that's one of the behaviors. Can I tell you what veganism is? Always get them back to it's a philosophy of the non-use and non-exploitation of animals. And so eating them is kind of one of the things we do. It forces people not to have the excuse that this is about fussy diets.
So we've got another question here from Sherry. Thank you again for the donation, Sherry. This is a very important question for me. When experiencing the loss of a companion animal, where do you turn to when suicide feels like your only option? Very serious question. It is indeed. So let's hear your answer to that, Claire.
Yeah, Sherry, when we connect, who was it? What philosopher was it says you've never really experienced life until you've connected with a non-human animal. You've never really connected with anyone who's lived with companion animals and realizes their absolute sentience and how much they're so much part of they don't just come in for a while, they're there from the whole of their lives, however long you've got them. Having experienced the agony of what that feels like, and I've now lost several animals, it's excruciating. There's no doubt about it. None of us are getting out of here alive. There's one sure thing is part of life is death. For someone who can feel that strongly about another, we don't want you to lose your life. We want you to be here, to be contributing to take away the suffering of another rescue animal that you can bring into your life. We've got to transmute that agony into something very positive. Firstly, give a voice to it. It is to feel that depth of pain. Really, I think it's because it's against the backcloth of the suffering of all these other animals that we know don't have their lives taken seriously or they're alone at the end. I think it taps into a lot of that, and therefore I think the agony is much bigger than actually the individual relationship. I know it was for me. Sometimes it's really what we're saying is, suicide is ending one's lives. When we really look at that, we say it's, basically we want the pain to go away. Ask yourself, if I was to do that, if I was to kill myself, what would no longer be here? And it's usually that deep sense of something that's been taken from you, as if all your skin's been stripped off. It's really very real. That's what you want to take away. And so we have to come to terms with the fact that we are only here for a limited time. It's not forever. I don't know people's experiences. I've certainly had experiences, my general psychology friends would probably think I'm crazy, but they probably think that already, I've had times when I know my past animals are around me. I've, had, feelings against my legs of pushing against them. I've also experienced that with humans. My own mother dying, I experienced her presence very powerfully. So we don't know the mystery of life, we know our living felt experience, don't we? But actually, I think nothing is lost, really. Perhaps we change our state. That's another existential angst of what is this really all about? But Sherry, we need people here. We need people that feel that strongly. Often when people lose a companion animal, they go, "Oh, I'm never going to do that again." And I understand that, because you think, how could I go through such loss again? If we can come alongside the sentience and livingness of all of us, come alongside another companion animal that will get to experience the connection and family that you obviously offer. We take away a little bit more of someone else's suffering is really the way to reduce our own, I think. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Claire. And before we move on to the final 15 or 20 minutes of the stream, I've got 3 questions from Patreon members that I said I would guarantee an answer. So I've got 3 for you here, Claire. This one is from Jack. I'm just going to paste that in the comment thing myself, and I'll try and get that on the screen. So Jack said, in order to cope with Vystopia, a tactic I use is to mock and ridicule the silly, fallible ideas using satire. Do you think this tactic risks alienating vegans further for society at large? That is the question.
Okay, here we go. Yeah, in order to cope with Vystopia, attack and mock and ridicule the silly. Now, presumably you're not doing this in street activism, you're doing it online, I'm imagine. Is that right, George, you think?
Yeah, I know Jack, and he has like a TikTok account and stuff, and he likes to take the piss a lot. He's a funny dude. But that, I guess his question is like, is that effective, and should we be doing that, I guess?
Oh, often humor, there's somebody here called Andy, oh gosh, why don't I know his second name? He's actually a dear mate of mine. Andy Faulkner, exactly. Everyone knows Andy. Andy is an extraordinary activist. He's done more street activism than anyone I know. And I knew him, must be 15 years ago. We both became vegan. So that's a little bit less time for him. But he does very funny things, taking the piss out of, things like hunting or whatever. And, did I swear on your show? Sorry about that, George.
Please do.
It's and he does that because he's trying to just wake people up, the chink in consciousness. I think those things do they get through to the actual non-vegan? I'm not sure really, Jack. However, they can be very powerfully used, I think, by vegans to actually portray to other people, to open up a conversation. What we don't want is people use it as an excuse to not become, not engage with the suffering of the animals. But honestly, Jack, if we knew the number one way how people became vegan, we would all be doing it, I can assure you. So if you can, you mock and ridicule the silly, that's right. It's like, I need my cheese or whatever, it's as long as try and laugh at the behavior. I think that's the thing. Laugh at the behavior, not the person, because people do not like being shamed. We do not like being shamed. People react in terrible ways to actually offset that. So if we say you're a complete idiot, is like, if we just subtly change it, it's like, what you are doing is it's complete crap behavior. My own personal feeling is that gives a little bit of room for them not to look at the behavior, i.e. they got a chance, they got power to change it. So, but yeah, what do you think, George? What do you think about the satire and that sort of thing? It could be very powerful.
When I first went vegan, I loved the actual piss take, like vegan side. In fact, I think it might have even just been as I was going vegan. I actually think I quite liked it, like seeing stuff like vegan sidekick cartoons and stuff like that. And the memes that generally ridiculed and stuff. So this was when I was technically a non-vegan. I actually think it kind of worked for me. But again, I think I'd already been convinced of the message. So it's hard for me to say. Speaking as someone as a non-vegan back in the day, before I was ever convinced of the message, I'm really not sure. But yeah, I guess it depends how you use it. I mean, some people, I'm sure some non-vegans might even find it fun. They might come across a meme and think, actually, that's pretty funny, and that is a dumb argument that we use and blah, blah, blah. But it's one of those different strokes for different folks things ultimately, right?
Yeah, I actually included a clip from Andy Faulkner and a guy called Kai Macbeth a few years ago. There was a television thing about, it was a big hoo-ha in Australia because this vegan couple had refused to rent their apartment out to non-vegans. People could rent their apartment who the blinking heck they like, particularly the cost of it. It was actually on the seafront. So it was just, and there was this hoo-ha, and it was on the news, not the news, but it was on these big channels and whatever. And so I did, it's out there somewhere, a sort of takeoff of, I think I was interviewed actually by the channel. That's it. They interviewed me, totally edited out what I really said. And so I thought, well, you're not getting away with that. And so I actually made my own clip of this. And I actually included one from Andy and Kai. And it was Andy in the garden pretending to be a baby calf, effectively. He's a guy. And Kai's there with a great big sort of lasso and caught him. And this guy goes, used terrible expletives to try and explain, what are you doing, you psycho, sort of thing, and take it for what it is. That was the words he used. And but it actually showed the absurdity of, but then he would say something very serious. I actually said, look at this, but actually what we are doing is to babies. And we were to do this to 3-year-old babies around the garden, people would lock us up. But this is what people are doing in the country. And I linked it back to what veganism was. So it can be very powerful. So, but I think when we laugh at other people, there's a lot of shaming. Shame does a lot to look at what's happened in our world in the last few years. The shaming of this polarization that seems to happen about people's health choices. People do not want to be shamed and laughed at. We get enough of that at school, inadvertently, and by other means, is people resist that when we focus on the behavior. Yeah. But thanks, thank you for, it is about how do you deal with Vystopia, because it is a horror story, what we know, and holding this information and trying to get through is very difficult, very challenging.
All right. The next Patreon member question is from Fiona. She says this. Let me just flash this up on the screen. She says, in light of recent world events, many have found an opportunity to say that veganism is part of a global agenda to weaken the world population. And unfortunately, this thinking seems to glorify meat and hunting. Can you please advise how we should respond to these claims and how to handle it to prevent us from falling further into despair? I'll just flash that first part of the comment.
Yeah, do the first part. I think that's right. Recently, many have found an opportunity. Veganism is part of it. Okay, yeah. Now, hasn't our friend Bill Gates, I said that very lightly, haven't these globalists, let's call them that, getting on the bandwagon, and yet they state very clearly they want population reduction. That's not a conspiracy. It's out there. Go on to the World Economic Forum. Look at the Georgia Guidestones. There is a desire to reduce population, and now whatever. So let's not get into the argument about what that looks like, but I encourage people to look at that. What a wonderful way to say, well, we should be eating bugs, or we're going to close down all these establishments. And then people go, you see all these, these veganism is part of this global agenda to actually weaken the population, stop people eating certain things. And so, but again, people it's using this thing called veganism as if it is a lifestyle choice. All of it is, veganism is very simple. It's, you either believe in cruelty or you don't. You believe in superiority over another or you don't. It's quite simple, really, if you think about it. Our job is, if you must keep bringing it back to the ethical imperative, and someone's as gentle as, look, if we could live healthy and happy lives without harming others, why wouldn't we? It's as simple as that. I do think there is a whipping up by major, I'm going to say globalists, because it's beyond corporations and it's part of, again, go and read Will Tuttle's book. He talks about the meat, the livestock, the dairy, the medical, the pharmaceutical, the military establishments working in lockstep, including the media, to have control. Really, that's nothing new in the last. That's always gone on. Is now veganism. Let's put that in there too, and then all these angry people will turn against something. They have people fighting. So I don't know if I'm answering the question here. Is they found an opportunity, veganism part of, again, it's clarifying and just saying there's some people that will hijack the term veganism or the non-eating of animals to say it is about other things. It is literally, it's a philosophy of the non-use and non-exploitation of animals. I think a lot of people are, I'm not going to eat bugs. Well, apart from the fact that bugs are animals, so, the vegan gets very upset about this as well, rightly so.
Yeah.
People have got to come back into their power and stop giving we have been hoodwinked as people, individuals to give our power away for the education of our children, for our health. We've given that to pharmaceutical companies. For our food production, we've given it to large corporations. People have got to start taking that responsibility back for things that happen in their lives. Because if you give that, they keep giving that away. So am I answering the question here, George, or am I waffling a little bit? I might be.
I think the end of the can you advise how to respond to the claims? Yeah,
I think it's saying to people, and I encourage us all to do our homework. Yes, there is an agenda to reduce population. That's not because I'm saying it or I've seen it on TikTok. It is because it is written in the Bill Gates mandate and in the World Economic Forum make it very clear. How they're going to do that, let's leave that for another day. The reality is, though, is they have hijacked and tried to make, veganism about plant-based meats. It's not, that's one aspect of this. And they're going to make a shed load of money out of it, by the way, as we know. They're scooping up the small companies like the Fry's Family Foods and all these other people that have been around for a long time. And they're just making a buck out of it, really. They don't really care about our health. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, Again, bring people back to it and say, look, there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of, things that are very dark going on. And if we want to go and explore that, we can. However, all I know is if I can live a healthy and happy life without harming others, why wouldn't I? It doesn't take away from the fact that it's totally unnecessary to eat animals to live, to survive, to have a great life. So if we can reduce suffering by the individual choices, we are contributing to a world that we want to create and that we want to live in. Yeah.
Great. And then the last question from a Patreon member is by Tom J. Tom J says this: if I had 1,000 to spend to promote veganism, how would you suggest I best spend it? So that not a psychology related one there, but I guess he's just interested to hear how Clare Mann would respond to that. So
I want you to use your own wisdom. Now you could give it to Carnism Debunked, and I haven't been set up for this because look at how much work George is pretty good to, and thank everyone to, just even $5 or so, I know the hours it takes to do what you do, George, and the subscriptions you've got to have to even keep this technology going. So, and, it's how do we have the biggest, Tom, you're asking $1,000 to promote veganism. All of us have to decide how best to use that. If we want to go somewhere fast, we work alone. If we want to work with go far, we work with others. How can you turn that 1,000 into 10,000? Yeah, money is a vehicle, if used wisely, can be used for evil, can also be used for good. What can you turn that into, George? Tom, that, you could give it a donation to Animals Asia, which I do subscribe to. I love what they're doing, and it's I can make a difference there. Do you put it into running a vegan outreach? You could do also, think of the biggest reach you can have. I would get together some of your closest vegan friends and have a bit of a brainstorm, to be honest with you. That's what I would do. But 10,000 could be turned into 10,000. You might say to people, I am going to give $1,000, but I want 1,000 people to give $5 each or something. It's all sorts of things. People want to be part of something, then collectively show them how you've used it. So I'm sort of diverting the question there, Tom, but absolutely.
Yeah, ultimately, Tom, it's up to you. However you best think it should be spent, please do that. But we've got about 10 minutes left now, so I'll just try and squeeze a few more of the important topics in. And the one thing I really wanted to ask you, just to keep it nice and short and sweet, would be, what would be your top 3 tips for dealing with Vystopia, Claire? If you were to just give people 3 tips, what would they be for dealing with Vystopia?
Sure. Right. Number 1, get your own house in order. Is literally put a strong foundation in of routines and practices every day to ground you. Okay. Now, is that, for me, it's I walk my rescue animals. I do yoga. I've done that for over 40 years. I don't go to classes these days. I do 5 to 10 minutes a couple of times a week. I ground myself. I eat a good whole food plant-based breakfast. I'm a great porridge believer, with all the wonderful things on top of it. And actually, have time for those routines that get you, and sit down and look at your goals every day. So put a strong foundation of health. So we've got sleeping well, eating well, some exercise, some groundedness. Okay. And that would also include things like meditation, and put things in place that resource you with a strong foundation to go out into the world. You'll be in a strong place. Improve your communication, because if you can come away from every conversation about veganism not being torn apart, knowing that you've pushed people in the right direction, then that is going to help you enormously. The third one is control your consumption of social media. Get rid of your television for a start. And I really believe that. You can always access what we need to access. Is do not go onto the internet first thing in the morning as soon as you wake up. Your brain waves are just coming back. Your brain movement is coming back from theta, alpha to beta. You're half asleep, you're more susceptible. And then we suddenly find out, oh my gosh, George is back on carbs. Who cares? We're pulled into the world of others. Is control your environment first thing on. Have some time away from the internet, because it's very active. I know it gives us community, and make time for other things. So your own health, George, is learning how to communicate effectively so that you are pushing people in the right, and you're not being totally torn apart from it. And thirdly is getting away from social media more, and being more present. That's where your meditation and your downtime, and getting out in nature. There's lots more. They all come in together here, George, but get out in nature, Yeah, that is really important. So there's lots of other tips I could do. They're all in there's lots of things on the website. On communication, there's a 30-day program called Vegan Voices, by the way, little mini videos people can access. So there's a good sort of thing on the typical nonsense and laundry list they ask us about veganism and what people say.
Amazing. Thank you, Claire. I guess another question I just want to squeeze in before the end is infighting in the vegan movement. Now, we've talked a lot about our anguish of dealing with this carnist world. A lot of anguish we face actually as vegans comes from within our own bloody movement. In fact, sometimes most of the anguish we face is coming from within our own movement. Certainly with me, I have more hatred from vegans than I have from non-vegans. So how do we deal with that infighting?
Absolutely. Well, if we want a happy, healthy, abundant, non-attacking, non-hateful world, start by donating one happy, healthy, abundant, non-hating vegan to the world. So firstly, we need to get our own house in order. It is so dispiriting, isn't it, George? I put up a post a little while. I referred to something someone else had done. They'd gone to a freedom march. And I've always said, if we don't have our freedom of thought, movement, and speech, the animals will have none from us. So I was supporting someone else. I had 1,500 hating vegans attack me for daring to think about humans. How helpful is that? Also, the non-vegans look at that and go, oh, this is great. They're all fighting amongst themselves. So I realized that those people were in pain at some level, and they couldn't bear that I had presented something that perhaps was in contradiction. That's not vegan, attacking other people, really. How do we deal with it? Not giving our energy to it would be something, George. Can I just do a very quick little, if I was here, we would do a physical demonstration. I want you to imagine, it's a Tai Chi movement, this, George, is if we were standing in the room, so you're going to have to visualize. Okay, George, I say to you, stand really close to me and put your hands up so it's against your shoulders here. Come really close to me. And after 3, we're going to shove each other.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Now, George is, I know he is stronger than me. He pushes me. I fall over. There's the first analogy, is when we let people get under our skin, they will be able to topple us over, either physically or psychologically, because, you know, when we're embroiled in the fighting and the pushback and whatever. So this time, George is just a clever guy. He's stronger than me. So I say, oh, let's do that again, George, because I'm going to push you over. So I put my arms out this time. And I push against George, okay? And then George, so I've got, my legs now are supporting me. So it's not so easy for George to push me over. So at 1, 2, 3, but he's still stronger. So he just bamboozles me and pushes me over, but it's harder. Okay. However, George has redirected my energy, because although he's not able to push me over so quickly, I'm still buying into this. So here's the analogy. I make distance, right? I'm not going to get into this vegan fighting, but I'm going to talk about it to all my friends and moan about it and get upset about it. I'm giving it energy. So it's redirecting my energy. Now, it's better shown than actually told. But this time I say, look, George, I'm going to push you over here. So I get my hands out like this. You put your hands up and I say, 1, 2, 3, push. George is ready. He pushes me. But this time I don't give any resistance. What's going to happen? George falls forward because he's pushing, but I'm not pushing him back. Do you see the analogy? When people push against us, when we push back, if we let them get too under, they push us over completely. If we make a distance, but still give it energy with some smart comment on Facebook, they redirect our energy. When we stand in our power and we make a statement of something, that says, you know, in order for animals to be free, we must all be focusing on there's not infighting. Bang. You can have the last word if you like. We are standing in our power. And if they push, they fall over. That's the best thing I can offer on that one, George. It's a good analogy though, hey?
Right. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Michael, for that donation as well. So as we can see, Claire, you know, this is, you know, just as our podcast helps a lot of people, you know, thanks so much for coming on, and I guess we'll wrap that live stream up now, but you know, did you want to you know, feel free to shout out some of your work and stuff, Claire, if you want to just quickly tell people about your books and how they can how they can book a session with you once more, just for anyone joining the stream late. Go ahead.
Sure, absolutely. So, well, firstly, you know, I'm so pleased that, you know, people are finding this helpful, without a doubt. All of us, everyone on this podcast allows me to sleep at night, because I know we're in good hands, George. Everybody, you know, Gandhi once said, if you think something small can't make a difference, try going to bed with a mosquito tonight. Okay. Now, all of us, you know, just because we are part of the solution collectively. Okay. Sometimes we look around, we think we're not making a difference. All of us, a conversation when somebody goes to get a coffee and they ask you why you don't eat dairy. I don't say I'm not vegan. I say, actually, there was a time when I used to drink that. And then I found out that baby calves have to lose their lives. So I decided not to, you know, always have a little example. Don't assume people know, oh, you're vegan, or I'll give you soy milk. You know, obviously the girl on the desk might be a little bit different, but generally people in the office every day be doing something. We're like the mosquitoes, and it's very uncomfortable. Okay. So all of us are doing our bit. A lot of you have Vystopia. Okay. I'm pleased to know it is in Spanish and it's also in Mandarin, which is great. And it's soon going to be in another European language, I believe. But not many people know about this one. Myths of choice. Why people won't change and what we can do about it. That is the little companion to Vystopia, because we find out how to transmute our Vystopia into powerful action for change through Vystopia and get a language to talk to our families and everything else. Can even give them that book. The first chapter is about, you know, for the non-vegan to wake them up a bit. But this is the one when we say, look, I'm talking to them, George, but why won't they change? Okay. Us going a little bit deeper about our own assumptions and resistances, and then actually using that can be very powerful. It's also an audio book, and you can get an e-copy, which is very reasonable as well. Get on my mailing list, you know, just go on there. It just says, I don't send out a lot of things, you know, all the time, but if it's helpful for dealing with Vystopia, so veganpsychologist.com, and there's a little sign up thing there. And just keep doing the work you're doing. Thank you for all being vegan and for being activists. This is really important.
Yeah, thank you so much, Claire. Claire, if you just stay on for a few minutes, I'll end the stream and we'll just stay in and pre-chat in the room. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We really hope that this stream helped you. And yeah, Claire, I just want to thank you so much again for giving up your time. And guys, if you want to book a one-on-one session with Claire, please do that. It will help you a lot. And we hope as well that this stream has helped you a lot today. So thank you, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.